Get real advice from renowned experts and entrepreneurs on today's business leaders. Here's your host, Gabe Arnold.
All right, on today's show, I have Shannon Graham, and he is somebody that I met through a good friend of mine, Jules Duncan, at an event last December, and I very quickly came to really respect Shannon and just really appreciate the work that he's doing in the world, and that's why I asked him to be on the show today. So welcome to the show, Shannon.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, I want to start out, as I always do, and ask you, when did you first realize that you were an entrepreneur?
An entrepreneur, probably, I was pretty young. I'm going to say probably in my very early teens.
Nice. What made you realize that, and what kind of things did you...
Well, my grandfather was an entrepreneur and my dad was an entrepreneur. So it was kind of in the blood, but there's this one story that I like to tell where, not to age myself, but back in the day, they had this thing called Columbia House, and it was a music distribution company. And they used to do this thing where they'd send you a catalog of all the different CDs you could get. And they'd give you some crazy deal, like 10 free CDs for like 1 cent or something. And then the deal was, the fine print was, you had to buy 1 CD for the next 5 years or something like that. But I saw it as an opportunity. And so I brought the catalog to school and I showed it to all my friends. And I came back to school with a box full of CDs, and I sold out all the CDs. So at the end of the day, I had a box full of money. And that was one of my first tastes of entrepreneurial life.
I remember that subscription. I used to get that too, but I wasn't smart enough to go resell the CDs. I just got them somehow. So
right.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, that's pretty interesting, because like, of all the entrepreneurs I've had on the show, most people are like, oh yeah, I cut lawns, or I delivered papers, or I sold candy at school, or things like that, the traditional stuff. But you immediately went to brokering something that you didn't have to invest in, or didn't
That's
really
right.
put much in, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I guess I just see things differently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the things I noticed about you right away is, one, you are the person that inspired my intention for the year, which is to be very observational and thoughtful, and really take my time in responding. Because I noticed when we were together in person at the mastermind that we were at, like, you would really take time to think before you responded. Like, and I think we're all told or hear, like, oh yeah, think before you speak, or be intentional about what you say. And you really would give great thought to your responses, and that really, really inspired me. And also, I would say, like, you definitely view the world from a very different perspective, which is, I'm sure, part of the work that you do. That we'll get to here in a little bit. So when you first started doing that, selling stuff and brokering things, as a teenager, how did it progress from there? Can you kind of give us the somewhat short version of selling CDs that you didn't have to buy to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, so I had this interesting relationship with working, because it's not like I was an entrepreneur, right out of the gates. I had jobs. But the funny thing is, I quit or got fired from every job I ever had. And so, the real turning point, if I'm being totally honest, is I started my coaching business when I was 21. And I still had a job at that time. And so I was working my job. And there was this point where I started to make money in my coaching business. And pretty quickly, that money from coaching started to surpass the money I was making from my job. And the comparison was like, not even, I would work maybe, I think back then I was charging $100 an hour. So I would work with, let's say, 5 clients, make $500, for 5 hours of work. Whereas in my other job, I think I got paid, I don't know, maybe $10 an hour, and I'd have to work for 8 hours. And by the end of the week, after all the stuff, you know, your paycheck was like nothing. And so I'm looking at the two realities going like, wait a second, like this doesn't add up. And so eventually I was making so much money from coaching that it just didn't make sense to be an employee anymore. And that was the time I went full steam ahead.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've had 2 jobs in my life, both of which I quit, and it, there's no comparison to working for yourself. You can make so much money and create so much value in such a short amount of time, and then you look at, you know, having to clock in and like get paid by the hour like that is a completely different paradigm for sure. And obviously as well, like I'm super thankful that the world is not all entrepreneurs, because I think it would be chaos
Yeah.
at best. So we all have our paths to take in our, you know, our roles to fill. But I know for me, there's never been anything but entrepreneurship. I mean, from a young age, I was selling stuff and doing things like you were. And when you figure out how fast you can make money in the right space, then it's like, oh yeah, I can never work a job again. I'm ruined for life. It's
Yeah.
unemployable forever.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And what led you into coaching? Like, did it kind of just fall in your lap? Was it something you were called to? Like, I know
Yeah.
things I just try and then I like them. I don't always have a strategy behind my first attempt.
Yeah. Well, it's a combination of things. I got involved with self-improvement at about age 16. And I made some pretty profound changes to my own life. And it was one of those things. I remember hearing this story about when Tony Robbins learned NLP. And for those of you who don't know what NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. It's a modality of helping people, and it can be very powerful. It can be very effective. And I remember the story goes, once he essentially finished the course of learning NLP, he was like really good, and so he would literally just run outside and just walk up to people and be like, hey, let me change your life. And it was similar for myself. I experienced such profound shifts in my life that I just wanted to share it. And I also have this fascination with human potential, because I know that all of us, no matter who you are, lives below their potential to some degree. Now, for some people, that degree is bigger than others, but everybody lives below their potential. It doesn't matter who you are. And so I'm fascinated with this idea of helping people live into more of their potential. And so it's this combination of when I experienced really awesome results, I wanted to share it with other people. And I just have this desire to see other people reach their maximum expression of themselves.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you start out coaching at 21 at what was obviously amazing money back then, tenfold what you were making in your job.
That's right.
What's been the progression from there to where you are now with coaching? Because I love what you're doing in Second Summit, and I love the focus, the level of impact that you're at. But what's been the kind of steps to get there?
Yeah, well, so it's, you know, time and money are an interesting thing, because we live in a world that very closely tries to tie the two together, but they're not related. And so, and that's been a large part of my progression as an entrepreneur, is understanding that time is not relative to money, and the amount of value that I can produce is what's valuable. And even if that takes an hour, it can still be worth thousands of dollars. And so I've constantly pushed myself. One of my, like I said, part of my obsession is human potential. And within that entire bracket, if you will, is this piece of like, how much can I do with how little? And it's not about laziness. It's actually about meekness. Meekness is one of the most misunderstood words in the world. When most people hear the word meek, they think of weak or mousy, timid. That's actually not what it means. If you do the research on the original definition, the Greek etymology of the word meek, it actually means strength under control. Strength under control. Now that phrase, the meek shall inherit the earth, makes more sense.
Yeah.
And so it's been my process to continuously come back to this place of like, how much stillness can I inhabit and create results from? How little can I say? How little can I do? And how big of a result can I produce? And the reason that I like that challenge is because I think it's easy for pretty much everyone in life to default to hustle mode, to just grind it out and work 12 hours a day and just get it done and do all that. Like that's actually not hard. That's actually relatively easy to do, because the human spirit is fairly unbreakable when you really light a fire underneath it. But what is hard is to pull all of that back, all of that frantic energy, all of that manic energy, all of that sporadic energy, to pull all of that back and just stand in one place and do one thing and get paid more than most, like practically anyone on the planet. And so that's the context for my progression. So there was two real big turning points for my career in coaching. The first was at one point I was getting paid for my knowledge and my experience. That's what was valuable to other people. They valued my knowledge about peak performance and about mindset and about confidence and about leadership and about things like that. And so that's what they paid me for. And one day I hit a wall and realized that in comparison to my imagination and my creativity, my knowledge and my experience were very limited. And if your value is what you get paid for, then what that meant was my value was limited because my knowledge and my experience was limited. And as soon as I came to that conclusion, it bothered me because I don't want the amount of money that I can make to be limited, AKA, I don't want the amount of impact that I can create to be limited. So cold turkey, I decided to stop essentially offering a service that allowed people to value me based on my knowledge and my experience. And I graduated to, as I like to say, I graduated from having people pay me to give them answers to the questions that they had, to paying me to ask me questions that I didn't know the answers to. And so that was the first big jump. And price-wise, I decided to do some pretty bold things in the coaching industry. I chose to charge $150,000 a year and to bring a 3-year commitment with that. 3-year commitments in the coaching industry is like pretty unheard of. But I was very clear about the type of people I wanted to work with, the type of impact I wanted to create. And I just have this firm belief that if you build it, they will come. I've studied boutique brands for over 10 years at this point, which is funny because I'm a baseball and t-shirt kind of guy. I'm not a super fancy guy, but I appreciate boutique brands, watches, cars, houses, boats, planes, things like that. So for example, you have this company Bugatti, which sells cars for over $1 million. And when they first announced that they were going to sell a car for $1 million, basically the entire auto industry was like, yeah, right. That's not going to happen. And now every time they sell Every time they roll out a new model, it sells out. And so I truly believe if you build it, they will come. Somebody will buy it. If you create something, especially if it's valuable, and everyone's definition of value is a little different, but if it's truly valuable, then someone will be attracted to it. And that's, when you have a significant other and bills to pay and things like that, that can be a hard mentality to wrap your head around. But I've also come to decide that what you stand for internally is more important than what demands your attention externally. So what I mean by that is I see a lot of people get victimized by what demands their attention externally and abandon what they stand for internally in the process of doing so. And it sets them up for major failure. So I've decided to play the game the opposite way. I will let bills go unpaid. I will, if obviously I want to be as integrous as possible. So at this point, I always pay my bills on time. But if it's the difference between paying a bill and me staying in integrity with myself, I'm going to choose myself every time. Because I've done the opposite enough times, and I know the cost. The actual cost at the end of the day is too much. And so that program is called Legacy. And I've run that program now for over 6 years. And in the process of being in that program and working with people, I started getting introduced to new and different types of people. And one niche of person that I've been introduced to recently is what I guess you'd call a high net worth or an ultra high net worth individual. And these are people who have exited companies for large sums of money. They've taken the traditional 2 to 3 years off and just kind of fucked off and bought all the toys and did all the things. And Tony Robbins calls it the ultimate failure, when you get everything in life that you think was going to do it and it doesn't do it.
Yeah.
So these guys are in an interesting position. They wake up one day and they realize fundamentally they are not fulfilled, which sucks. And even though they could be retired for the rest of their life, they're not done. There's something in their heart that calls them to something bigger. And so I created a program called Second Summit, which is specifically for that type of person. And I've priced that at $1 million. And that program is really exciting to me because I think that there's this stigma about wealthy people, and certainly about extremely wealthy people, that for some reason they can't have problems, or for some reason they can't have pain, or they can't have struggles, or they can't be stuck, or they can't feel alone, or they can't. It's the 98% tend to not have a lot of sympathy, as you can imagine. But the pain is very real. The pain is very real. And I think that's the bridge we need to gap. Because if the 98% and the 2% aren't connected, then it doesn't lead to a better world. And so I want to bridge that gap. I want to help, the 1% become more integrated, become more whole in their being, so they don't feel fragmented, so they can feel fulfilled, and so that they can get back into the game of making the world a better place, because that's what a lot of these guys desire, and to kind of bring their humanness back into the picture, so that the 98% and the 2 to 1% have an opportunity to create together. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And like we've had deeper conversation around that, and you're definitely right. Like you can achieve all this wealth, all this success, and like if that's really all you were driving at, and then you have that big exit, then man, what a depressing place to be. Like,
yeah. Well, it's tricky, man. Like the world, especially Western civilization, really pushes this idea that making a lot of money is a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's not. I mean, I've been rich and I've been poor, and I'll tell you, rich is better.
That's right.
It just is.
Yep.
But it doesn't, and I've come to learn some things actually, Gabe, which is kind of interesting. They say money doesn't buy happiness. Money does actually buy happiness. It really does.
Definitely.
It buys happiness. And this is an important distinction to make. This is an important distinction to make. Happiness is not a core state of being. Happiness is like a cloud. It comes and it goes. Just like sadness. You can be sad, and then for a little while you're sad, and then you're not sad. You can be happy, and then for a while you're happy, and then you're not happy. I think people feel like happiness has to be this permanent state that they live in. And that'd be the equivalent of thinking that like the flow, like being in flow state is something you need to be in all the time. Well, you can't be in flow all the time. Mm-hmm. And so there's this idea that money doesn't buy happiness. It's totally false. I bought my wife a Lexus for Valentine's Day. She was pretty happy.
Yeah.
and like genuinely happy, because her old car was falling apart. It was starting to get kind of like unsafe to drive. And we said, you know what, let's put you in something where you don't even have to have that like fear or doubt or whatever like looming over you. Yes, it created some happiness. I donated some money to a cause that helps children, and the children were actually there in person during the event, and they got to see the money, the big check at the end, and what that meant for them. What it meant for them was like that their after school program was paid for the entire year, and they didn't have to stress about whether the program was going to be open or not, because a lot of these kids come from families that their parents aren't around after school. Some of them, the household is toxic. They get fed, their homework gets done, and they make friends, and they can learn things. And it's a beautiful, the Boys and Girls Club, it's a beautiful thing. There was some happiness, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't care what the fuck you say. Money certainly buys happiness, but it does not buy fulfillment.
Yeah.
And that's very different. It does not buy fulfillment. Fulfillment is how we feel about ourselves. And that's different, because you can have no money and be fulfilled. And you can have tons of money and be fulfilled. Or you can have no money and not be fulfilled, and you can have tons of money and be fulfilled, or you can have tons of money and not be fulfilled. There's that, right? But you know, and it's not to say that the only way to happiness is through money, right? Like you can focus on gratitude and be happy. So I'm not saying that money is the only avenue to happiness, but just like you know, there's a lot of things in life that there's multiple avenues to get there.
Yeah.
So money happens to be one of them. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. So my point is, the Western civilization has this interesting obsession with money, and that it's just going to solve all your problems. And I'll tell you what, it solves a lot of problems, but it doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't solve the one problem of fulfillment. And I think what happens is the wires get crossed, and people begin to associate happiness and fulfillment as the same thing, and they're not. And fulfillment really is a practice. It's an art. It's not a science, and that's the danger, because making money is a science. It's an exact science. I can break down for you how I've made all the money I've ever made. I could reverse engineer it and mathematically show you how I did it. But fulfillment is not. It is an art, which means that it's messy, which means that there is no clear blueprint. What rich people love about making money is that it's predictable, because it is a science. If you do this and then you do that, you get this. 2 + 2 = 4 every single time. But fulfillment, there's no clear path. And so I think they kind of like turn a blind eye and cross their fingers like, well, if I have enough money, then it'll do it. It never does it. And here's why. Because most of the time, especially these guys that exit for large sums of money, they make a decision in the very beginning that they're going to sacrifice. They're going to sacrifice their fulfillment. They're going to sacrifice usually their health. They're going to sacrifice sleep a lot of times. They're going to sacrifice their relationships. So there's this whole fistful of things that they sacrifice in the beginning. And when I say beginning, I mean beginning, middle, and end. So let's say it takes 10 to 15 years to exit for $1 billion. These days, it's significantly less than that. But let's just say that's what it is. Let's just say it's 10 years. So what that means technically is that you have 10 years of avoiding your fulfillment. 10 years of avoiding your health, 10 years of avoiding your relationships. And that becomes a habit. You have a habit of not engaging with your fulfillment. So when all the money comes, when that one faithful day comes and you get the huge paycheck, you still have a terrible habit of not paying attention or not engaging with your fulfillment or your health or your relationships. And people think they can just take the shortcut and buy it all back. You can't buy it all back because it's an art, not a science. And that's why Tony calls it the ultimate failure, because it just makes sense. Like you think if you just have so much money that like there's nothing you can't buy. And that's true, except for one thing. And it just happens to be the one thing that everybody wants. Yeah. And so, so it becomes a little bit of a trap. And so that's why I want to reshape that landscape so that we can create a new narrative. And the new narrative is, hey, making lots of money is awesome and fulfillment matters. And I don't want to be cleaning up the mess on the back end. I want to also simultaneously be creating beacons and kind of monikers for the front end. So people in the early stages that will eventually exit get drilled into this idea that fulfillment matters now, that health matters now, that relationships matter now. And those are not things to sacrifice. If anything, those are things to double down on. And once that narrative becomes kind of the new normal, I think it'll do that will end up doing a lot of good in the world.
Yeah, and I think you're well positioned to say, hey, you can have fulfillment and relationships and health and all these other things in life that you really need, and you can still achieve your big dream of having the big exit because you've reverse engineered, getting paid what most people don't. Like I'm sure, I'm sure a lot of the folks in this space that you talk to, like, don't necessarily make the hourly that you figured out how to make. Like if they did equate it back and also just, I know the stories you've told about things you've done in New Zealand and like world impact level things you do, like you can truly speak to this and say, hey, this is possible. Everything's possible. Everything, if we focus on it and give it attention, because I do think you're right. I think there's a huge fallacy that like in order to make the big exit or make the big money or be super successful, you have to log X amount of time, which yes, right, time is a factor, but it's not as linear as we make it, I don't think.
Yeah. And it's true. There's a lot of really high power entrepreneurs that are starting to wake up to this idea. Jack Dorsey is one of them. Jack Dorsey is the founder of Twitter. And he's at home with his family by 5 o'clock every night. Mm-hmm. For a guy of his stature, for a guy of his status, that's practically unheard of.
Yeah.
But he's like, it really, there's this adage that came out a number of years ago, which is work smarter, not harder. But no one really took it to heart. It's like, yeah, some people kind of like metaphorically got it, maybe kind of applied it a little bit. But really predominantly there was still this like Gary V kind of fucking, you got to hustle, you got to grind, you got to 18 hours a day, blah, blah, blah kind of thing. And it's like, come on, man. Like if you really go really, really deep on this whole thing, working smarter, not harder, is the way. And it requires you to go really deep on what that means.
Yeah.
And so Jack Dorsey's like moving in that direction. Even Elon Musk. Elon was notorious for sleeping, I think like 2 or 3 hours a night.
Yeah.
And you can imagine eventually 2 or 3 hours a night, especially if you charge at the level that Elon does, you're going to hit the wall.
Yeah.
And he hit the wall. And for Elon to hit the wall, that's a problem, because he's got SpaceX, he's got Tesla, he's got Neuralink, he's got Solar City, he's got Boring Company, he's got one or two other things going on. And so it's important for him to be optimized. And so as much as he liked to burn the midnight oil and do all that stuff, he hit the wall and he said, you know what, it's better. It's actually better to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep, because even though it takes up more time, I'm more efficient.
Yeah.
And, you know, Elon, it would be totally hypocritical of Elon to be working on all these efficiency things like rockets that can land themselves and be reusable, and cars that don't require gas that can actually go further on a full charge than a car with a full tank. And then for him to be totally burnt out, like, right? So I think he's starting to get it. We're starting to emerge and see more and more of this. So I just want to like bulldoze the progress on that. And yeah.
No, it's definitely, I feel like we're at a really, really interesting like inflection point in our world, and everything definitely comes together at the right time for a reason. Like we can always look back and see it, but we're definitely at one of those points where we have to reconsider like how we're doing things, you know, and question, you know, why we started doing them in the beginning. And that's
right.
That's the depth of thought and just like the strategic thinking that you do, that I really just love the intention behind that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'm curious. Go ahead.
Yeah. You're curious?
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned this in a note you sent over, that your goal is by 2055 to move the world to a tier 1 civilization level.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, so back in I believe in the 50s, there's an astrophysicist named Kardashev, and he theorized. The theory begins with the pre-assumption that life, extraterrestrial life, exists.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts the theory with that pre-assumption, which in my opinion I think is pretty safe. You know, a lot of people would say, well, Shannon, where's the evidence? We've been looking for a long time. Well, the universe is a pretty big place. And if you take a bucket, if you take a 5-gallon bucket and you dip it into the ocean and you pull it out and you look in it for sharks and whales and you don't see any, that doesn't mean there's no sharks and whales in the ocean. It just means in that little sample that you took, you didn't find any. That's basically our research on extraterrestrials currently.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so he says, so basically the theory is, okay, let's pre-assume that extraterrestrials exist. Great. Now, there must be different levels of advancement. There must be different levels of civilization. So he basically decided that there's 3 different levels of civilization: tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And a tier 1 civilization is a civilization that can utilize all of the energy of its home planet. So the Kardashev scale is predominantly based on energy consumption. The intelligence level of a civilization can be directly correlated to their energy consumption. How many energy sources can they draw energy from? So how many, and to what quality or to what efficiency? So a type 1 civilization can harness all of the power of a home planet. So wind, water, even like things like earthquakes or earth, you know, energy, and solar.
Mm-hmm.
Type 2, type 3 get more complex. But suffice to say, Earth currently is a type 0 civilization. However, it's speculated that we're moving towards type 1 status. And most of the theoretical physicists imagine that we'll reach tier 1 status in 100 to 150 years, which I think is inaccurate. I believe that technology and human beings are evolving much faster than we think that they are.
Mhm.
And yeah, and so a large part of my work has to do with moving society towards tier one status in my lifetime.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love, and that's what I just really like about the time I get to spend with you, Shannon, just and how you view the world, because you're looking at, really, really big possibilities, big problems to solve. And we'll definitely dive into some deeper stories on another episode as well, because just how you think about things and how deep you go, and the results that come out of that are just fascinating to me, because you think about things in just a completely different way. And I've met hundreds and thousands of entrepreneurs over the years, and you just have a really fresh, unique perspective. And that's what moves the world, when somebody, in a sense, burns it all to the ground and starts with something brand new, or just comes at things with a completely different perspective. And definitely, I'm just always impacted when I get to talk to you, and the view that you have. So I super appreciate the time.
I,
And
thanks.
yeah, last thing here, as we just kind of wrap up for this session, is where should people find you? What's the best way to connect with you? And
If someone is wanting to connect with me, right here on good old Facebook is a great place to do it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. We'll definitely have you back soon and see what kind of amazing things you've been working on. And I super appreciate it.
This show is brought to you by Today's Business Leaders. Learn more at our website, todaysbusinessleaders.com. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today.